Good evening and welcome to the September 19th meeting of the Yukon Planning Commission. We will begin tonight with an invocation by Commissioner Geis and a flag salute by Commissioner Wright. Please stand.
Father, we thank you for your presence. We invite you here today and we ask you just grant us wisdom in the decisions we make and that you would be with our city and everyone here. We love you, we thank you and praise you for everything. In your name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Chairman Baker,
Here.
Commissioner Wright,
Here.
Commissioner Inmark is absent, Commissioner Gerba,
Here.
Commissioner Geis.
Here.
If you've had the chance to read the minutes of the October 8th meeting, I'll entertain a motion.
A motion to approve.
A second.
Have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Chairman Baker,
Yes.
Chairman Wright, or Commissioner Wright,
Yes.
Commissioner Gerba,
Yes.
Commissioner Geis.
Yes.
If we have anyone in the audience that is here to speak on a item that is not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. Seeing none, we will move to item 3. To hear a request by Jeff Halp Automation Integrated LLC on behalf of Resurrection Lutheran Church for a curb cut located at 11715 Northwest 10th. Please state your name and your address, please.
Jeff Howe, Automation Integrated, 235 North MacArthur Boulevard, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Okay, tell us about your project.
Resurrection Lutheran Church would like to split their property on Northwest 10th, and that would require 2 curb cuts. So I've worked with city planning and the city engineer to determine 2 locations that are suitable for city of Yukon to do that, and made a permit application.
Okay. Only question I have is the curb cut on the western piece of property is all the way over to the property line. Why was it moved way over there? Just
That was the
was it to line up
compromise.
on with the street?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the request of the city engineer to locate those 2 spots.
Okay.
So the yellow line is the intended split?
Yes, sir.
And is this the Resurrection Lutheran that is
On Vandeman,
on
right here
Vandeman
around the
now?
corner.
Okay.
Yeah. 67 years now, I think, so
Wow.
New building?
finally getting some new digs.
Anybody else have any questions? Someone like to read the motion?
I can. Maybe. In the case of the curb cut application by Automation Integrated LLC for Resurrection Lutheran Church, we have read the staff report and received testimony at the public hearing. We find ourselves in agreement with the staff findings cited in the staff report. I move that this item be recommended for approval.
I have a motion.
A second.
I have a second. Roll call?
Chairman Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Wright,
Yes.
Commissioner Gerba,
Yes.
Commissioner Geis.
Yes.
Good luck with your project.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Item 4 and item 5 will be continued to the October meeting. Am I correct?
October 10th. is
October
the
10th
meeting.
meeting? Okay. All right. Item 6, to hear a presentation on the final draft of the Unified Development Code update by Johnson and Associate. This item will be for discussion only. Greetings.
Good evening. Mark Zitzow with Johnson and Associates. We do have a PowerPoint.
We do.
I'm going to make it brief. You've seen many PowerPoints from me to this point, so
We're running Windows 3.1, but
we'll get there. All right, so we're here for another update on the zoning code. I think you've all, to this point, have been provided what is the complete draft. So as we move through this, we've talked about Articles 1 through 4 previously. So today, I'm going to run through Articles 5 through 9. Some of those are just kind of the background, the administration, so there's not much in there that's different. But Article 5 is what we're going to start with. This is one of the denser articles in the code. This is your streetscape, access, parking, landscape, signage, lighting, design standards, and sidewalks. So there's quite a bit in here. Many of this has remained unchanged, but what we've done is put it all in one place, put it in tables, and put it in graphics to make it much easier to understand and comprehend. So an example of that is your streetscape standards. So depending on the type of road that you're on, there are different standards for each one of those, where those should be placed, where the sidewalk should be placed, how a median might interact with it. So all of that is now in one table. For access management, again, this is something that we've just put into a table to make it easier to understand. So in this scenario, if you're reviewing a PUD or a site plan, there's now a table that you can reference to go along with your engineering comments in a staff report of where those driveways should be placed, how far apart they should be placed, to make sure that we're ensuring that they're a safe distance apart. Through the comprehensive plan, one of the items we talked about heavily was access management. We've noted that there are some commercial corridors in Yukon that have higher traffic and cause backups. Part of that is access management. When every single user has its own driveway, some sites have 4 driveways, the conflicts that are created by having that many driveways in the ins and outs can create problems. So our goal was just to reiterate in a table what proper spacing should be, so you have that as you are reviewing your cases. And there's also non-residential driveway separation. So again, within the code, we now have just more graphics about what that looks like. Yes.
On that. On the minor and major arterial, non-residential, 500 feet.
Say the 2 one more time.
On your access management,
Right.
it says 500 feet, I take it, that's in feet.
Right.
And can reduce to 300 if one-way turn access controls are provided. Is that like, you're talking like right turn only?
Correct. So if you look at the screen here, occasionally on some intersections or boulevard approaches into developments, you'll see a divider. What it does is it will prevent someone from making that left turn.
Discourage.
Discourage. Large trucks can always hop.
Welcome to
curb,
Yukon.
Yeah.
It's all about the wheelbase.
Okay, thank you.
And so this slide just shows some of those options. Obviously, engineers or design firms can propose alternative ones that you all would review during that plan stage, but these have worked their way into the code. And then parking and loading. I think sometimes we as kind of professionals in the industry and as planning commissioners, we know that parking stalls, how wide they are, how deep they are. But if you're just a resident looking at the code or a developer, you might not be as familiar. So again, we've added some graphics to let people know how these parking lots would lay out and the dimensions that would be required. Parking and loading, one of the new things that we put in the code is the potential for a reduction in the code. So in order to receive that reduction, you would have to provide additional landscaping or bike racks or different types of parking for motorcycle or scooter. But you're only allowed to reduce it up to 15%. I think in recent years, what we've seen with ride sharing, you guys have started investing in sidewalks and multi-use pathways. So for some users, code might be too many parking spaces. So this gives a little bit of a reduction and a bit of a carrot and stick approach to where if you're getting something in return, you're allowing that small reduction to occur. Ultimately, if a user changed, the city has the authority to go back, and if a parking problem is created, require the current property owner or the tenant to make arrangements for additional parking. Landscaping is one of the big ones. I think we've talked about it multiple times through the comprehensive plan, in our survey, through conversations with stakeholders, including Planning Commission, City Council. There's really a feel that our corridors and our commercial areas were just not landscaped enough and not landscaped on par with other municipalities. So this is what the current requirements are. 2 trees plus 1 tree for every 7 parking spaces. Most codes are going to tie parking and landscaping together as a way to calculate that. So
What was the change on that from the original code? I mean, is that
that is the original code.
okay?
And so this landscape plan is what you would see for this development. This was a project that had come through recently. And so you can see there's 2, 4, 6, 7 trees on this property. So with the new code, what we're requiring is 8% of the total site, 10% of the site in the I-40 corridor. Industrial uses that don't abut residential are 4%, and then we have buffers. So we started baking into the code mitigation between land uses that might not be compatible. So where commercial or industrial are abutting residential, those landscaping and buffers are more intense because those uses might not be compatible. So what that same site plan would look like under the new code is much more landscaping in the front and on the sides, and then just an overall increase. We've compared this to Oklahoma City, we've compared this to Edmond, I think those are the two. This is not greater than Edmond. It is closer, slightly more than Oklahoma City's code, but we feel like regionally this is an appropriate amount of landscaping. Your current code is not quite providing enough.
Mark, I would say that it's right on par with what Oklahoma City
Okay.
requires.
So then we move into lighting. The lighting, we thought this was a creative approach. There are standards, prevents light spillover from commercial uses onto adjacent properties. And there are requirements that are in here about fixture height. But what we liked was we put in the code a minimum restriction. What we're allowing for, though, is if somebody comes in and they want to do something different, they can provide you with a photometric plan and show you, here's what I want to do, here's how it lights up, here's the fixtures I want to use. That allows them flexibility in their project if the code requirements for the fixtures aren't quite what they want. So there's flexibility there as they work through their process, if they provide you the right details for you to make that decision.
So that height is just height above wherever the base of that light is.
Correct.
That's not, and I mentioned that because in Yukon, we have the future Frisco corridor between 66 and Bandamit, where the height of the future buildings is probably 30 to 40 feet higher than the residential to the east. So the light that's 20 feet appears to be at 50 feet to the house. How is that accounted for?
So this is for fixtures in a parking lot.
Right.
This is not necessarily fixtures that are on a building.
No, that's what I mean.
So-
Parking lot lighting.
Right, so in this scenario, the maximum fixture height is 35 feet, which, depending on the roof pitch, could be at the top of a structure. But what we're doing in here is requiring light shields and other things to be put in place so that the light is not leaving the site. It needs to be directed down and inward. So that's the goal here, is that we're not projecting light outside of the properties, it's staying in and it's being internally lit. The other thing I'll note on that is to get to that 35 feet, you have to be more than 250 feet away from the residential neighborhood.
Is that to the lot, to the edge of the lots, or
To the property.
structures?
Could be to the property.
Okay, thank you.
Signage, we put in a table with the new zoning districts, but ultimately, I think as we made it through this, signage was not amended or changed. We had a meeting with some sign companies and some stakeholders, and through this whole process, it was always the intent to not change or delve into the sign code for any changes to that. So
Unfortunately, I missed that meeting, and this is kind of my job, so I do have a few questions for you. So,
Okay.
the table's great. I love the table. It definitely helps with some of the studying that I encourage. You know, if you're an outside business, it doesn't seem that you've addressed electronic signs, the message center signs, if you will.
Sure. I may defer that to Kelly as she looks through the code regarding EMD signs and how that was treated. But we can come back to that after
Perfect.
she finds it.
So, just a few things. I mean, overall, it's pretty good, but let's see. So, permit procedures, section G. There's a few things that are, it's mistypes, I think, but it does add to some confusion. I wonder about some of the requirements for the permitting and just thinking about in today and age of like what we're able to get from our clients. 2 sets of plans and a digital copy submitted in a PDF format seems like overkill. A lot of this stuff's done electronically where you would just send a site plan, if you will. And then with site plans being to scale, that is a very difficult thing to produce sometimes. And I know the city's, open to that, but, if we're going to follow the code, I think just it can be tough, put it that way. And not all property owners have those items, if you will. So I would look at maybe some of the, the red tape to go through. But the only other question I would have is like when it comes to a reconnect on a sign, is there any verbiage in here when it comes to reconnect? Because Oklahoma City has that. And then Oklahoma City also talks about like when you replace faces on a sign, like an existing structure, like you don't have to pull a permit for that because you're essentially pulling out a piece of plastic and putting in a new one to simplify, if you will. So
Sure.
Was there any consideration to that? And I know your meeting, heavily was attended to by like maybe billboard folks,
Right.
but the on-premise stuff, I think that should be looked at as well. No sign permits for face changes, and then, and then the EMD. Clarify that.
We will do that. So on those items, we'll dig back into the code and get your response there. And then if we need to, we can follow up one-on-one and talk through that.
I would appreciate that. Yeah, I would be available.
Great. So the building materials, this was one that I think we talked quite a bit at length about. So current state statute prevented us from putting any design requirements on single family. It did not restrict design requirements on duplexes or more intense zoning districts. So what we did in the code, knowing we couldn't really tackle requiring single-family homes to be 70% brick, what we did include was some design requirements on duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and any multifamily projects that come through. So the purpose here was to ensure that those zoning districts and those structures have longer-lasting materials. So that's brick, hardy board or cementitious board, native stone, glass, metal, and all those requirements. What we also included was a restriction of 25% of kind of that architectural metal or aluminum steel on the facades that are visible from public streets. EIFS and other insulated wall cladding is allowed, but also only up to 25% of the structure and above the ground floor. We prohibited plain or painted concrete block, tilt-up concrete panels, prefabricated steel panels, and corrugated metal siding. So those would not be permitted. So in order for someone to propose something like that, they would be required to come through the rezoning process into a PUD or a SPUD to request that. And with that, they would have to have the architectural details and elevations and be seeking your approval through that process. Yes, sir.
However, there was a meeting last week after they got the single-family legislation passed last year. Our legislators who campaign on, they love local control of government, had a meeting about doing the same thing to multifamily because those terrible planning commissions around the state are getting in the way of affordable housing, which is, I didn't see anyone from your side of the world at the meeting. All I saw was contractors. So have you any ideas about whether that is going to be approached in the next session or not?
I haven't heard that. They typically don't invite us urban planners to those meetings for that reason. But we are involved with the local planning association chapter as we track legislation, so we'll be happy to reach out to them and give you a follow-up on what they think the likelihood of that moving forward is.
Because I don't remember getting any heads up last year that legislation was even in the works, or we certainly would have buttonholed at least our local legislature.
Yeah, if I recall, that one went through, so it was approved last year, but I think it went through 12 to 18 months pre-discussion before it got there, and it happened during COVID. And so I think there was a little bit less conversation publicly that happened just based on
Yeah,
what's going on.
if I remember right, it was introduced in 2018 and then, yeah, wasn't adopted until 2021.
Yeah.
So,
But we'll look into that and get some more information on what the current bill includes. If it's like the previous one, it wouldn't restrict you from requiring more restrictions in a PUD, but it may, that's why we'll have to look into it. But if it was passed, it would potentially prevent us from putting this directly into the code.
Right.
The current one, you can put whatever restrictions you want if they're in a PUD. But when someone comes through with a straight, single-family zoning case, you can't put any additional restrictions in. So with the duplexes in particular, these are in the code. We were looking at, and we went back, listened to old planning commission hearings. We looked at all the PUDs that had been approved to figure out what is being changed when duplexes were being adopted and what was being said and what were some of the bigger concerns. So what we did was create these example site plans that are in the code that show you how you'd have to lay out your property if you were constructing a duplex. And what that looks like is detached garage versus the front-facing garage. And the front-facing garage is one of the biggest requirement changes in the code. And that is your front porch and your front door has to extend closer to your front property line than your garage can. So typically what you see in what's been built is that large two-car garage, big metal door, and the front door of the house is pushed back. And you have two 20-foot garages right at the front of the street, and that's all you see. There is no other architectural detail. You see garage and you see roof. So knowing that we can correct that in the code and create a better product, we've done that, and that's what the second one on the screen is. It's showing a smaller driveway that's a shared driveway between the two units, so you don't have an expansive 40-foot approach. And then you have those front porches that are also required. And then we have examples of if you have an alley. So if you are in and around downtown and you have a platted alley or the alley's existing, there's options of how you can configure the lot to take advantage of that.
Mr. Reinhardt, there's often a 2 or 3 year gap between something coming through us and construction starting. I mean, it's surprising that sometimes years go by before these things start. Are the design standards applicable from when the city council approved it, or when the construction started, which may be under different design standards?
I think it would be when they apply for the building permit. Is that?
That would be correct. The only time it wouldn't be applicable is if something was approved through a PUD. So we're going to work through the adoption process, and that's going to include you all making a recommendation on the updated zoning map. And that map is going to be all the new categories, and all the existing ones are going to be transitioned into the new ones. So what that won't apply to are any existing PUDs where someone has existing rights. So those ones, those PUDs will not fall under the design guidelines, but any straight R2 property that is in Yukon, the day the code is adopted, any future building permit from that point on would be required to
So
follow.
it's when the permit application happens,
Right.
not when we vote on it. Okay, that's good news. Thank you.
This is just an example of if they're not building garages and they have a parking lot, the amount of screening that's required from the street. So it's trees 25 feet on center, continuous shrub plantings, and the combination of berms, shrubs, trees, and/or fencing to create an opaque visual barrier at a height of 3 feet. These are design standards for some of the entries. So porches have to be at least 4 feet deep and at least 1/4 of the unit width. So if you have a 20-foot wide unit, they're going to be required no less than a 5-foot wide porch that's 4 feet in depth. For courtyards, this would be on a deep lot or a wide lot when all individual entries cannot face a street. They would look inward. Those are kind of those California bungalow courts, if you've seen those. A lot of older TV shows, because they have that courtyard in the middle. And then the corner lots, each entry would face each street frontage. This avoids any one street frontage from getting neglected and just having that blank wall appearance. And then we move into the commercial standards. This was also one that was talked heavily about during our engagement process. So we've prohibited concrete and metal from exterior finishes unless adjacent buildings on both sides have those materials. So if this is in one of the industrial areas and you're smack in the middle between two buildings that have that, you'd be permitted that. But you would not be able to introduce that into an area that doesn't currently have it. And it has to be on both sides. But the metal cannot be more than 25% of the facade, similar to the previous requirement. Safe pedestrian access through parking lots into the building is required. Utility meters in the code, we've encouraged them to be located on the rear and on the sides, not in the front. And then we've got some additional requirements for roofing materials for metal roofs and flat roofs that require certain types of screening of mechanical equipment. So if you have it on the front, you're not looking at the building and seeing the big air conditioner. Sidewalks, we have put into the code and clarified. We worked with our city engineers on this. So 5 foot is required on all arterial and collector streets, but if they're put adjacent to the curb, then they have to be 6 feet. Our preference is always going to be the 5 foot sidewalk with the 5 foot green belt in between. It gives more separation and is a more comfortable and safe pedestrian experience. And then within subdivisions, we've maintained the 4 foot wide on all local streets within subdivisions. Those have lower traffic, and so the narrower sidewalk is sufficient there. So Article 6, we move into the infrastructure and public improvements. This is your streets, alleys, utilities, and other improvements. A lot of this is what came out of the comprehensive plan in working with the city engineer. So we're just making sure that it is clear to the development community that when they do a project, what exactly is expected of them from utility improvements, what size lines need to be constructed, and when and where they need to make those extensions. So if they're within a quarter mile, it is just automatic that they're going to have to extend those utilities. They want to be able to use private well or septic systems. One of the biggest things that came through, and we worked with staff quite a bit on this, and I think everyone agreed in looking at the surrounding communities that this was the appropriate path forward. But currently, the developer has to put up a bond for the project, which is a significant cost, in addition to constructing all of the infrastructure before they can record their plat. It is not uncommon for a developer to put up a bond to record the plat, or construct the utilities and roads to have them completely inspected and done before they can record it. It is very uncommon that a developer would have to do both at the same time before recording that plat. It's essentially double the cost of the development to do that. So when we had our meetings with the consultants and the developers, they all felt that this would be a much better path forward and help encourage development and be a more equitable solution. We worked with staff quite a bit, and we looked at all the surrounding communities, and nobody had kind of that double hit on this. So in this code, we are proposing that they would do one or the other, not both simultaneously. And then the open space requirement, we've talked heavily throughout the comprehensive planning process that Yukon does not have a lot of large tracts of land left that are serviced by utilities that can be residential subdivisions. But knowing that there are some, What we wanted to do was make sure that the open space requirements were sufficient. So in this, we are now requiring any neighborhood that's really urban, that's not a rural subdivision, be required to provide open space of 10% of the total development area. There be a maintenance agreement for that open space, and that the use is restricted to park and recreational purposes, including drainage, wooded areas, streams, and creeks. So we're encouraging the developer to maintain those natural areas to credit them toward part of that 10%. We want to see those preserved and also used for recreational purposes. Article 7 is that administration through this. So, a lot of this wasn't changed. It was really just put into the same spot in the code. Article 8 are the nonconformities. So, what happens when you update a zoning code and a zoning map is there will be someone that comes in that says, I have this building, it has this setback, or it's this height. A nonconformity is likely to be created somewhere in the city. So this is a very short article. I think it's half a page. But it basically says that if there's a nonconformity, it's allowed to exist as long as it remains in its current state. When they go to do a major remodel or an addition, it may get brought up to code at that point. But we're not trying to take away anyone's existing right and force them into a major rehab or renovation. And then enforcement as well remained pretty much the same. I think one of the biggest things and takeaways of this is all one document. It's all one chapter of the municipal code now. It's all in one place. It's easier to follow, understand, and work through. So in terms of where we're at in the current process, we're before you today with kind of that final draft. We've got some notes and takeaways that we need to follow up on already. We're going to do the same thing to City Council, and we hope to be back before you in November with a final presentation and ultimately a final vote for you all to make that recommendation to City Council, where we hope to be before them in November or December. So by the end of the year, the goal is to have this code adopted with the new zoning map. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
So the next step is to take this to the council, make some adjustments, and then we'll get a new draft to review prior to voting.
So you will get the final proposed document for adoption. So at the next presentation, if there are changes that come out of it based on our conversation, based on conversations with the council, we'll make those and we'll note those at the next presentation as to what's different.
Okay. So do we have any further chances to make suggestions, changes, recommendations after tonight?
Absolutely. I would say that really before we come back to you in November with that final document is kind of that window to discuss anything and talk through any potential revisions to this.
Because there's maybe 5 or 6 sentences in the document that just don't make any sense. They look like they were, especially lighting, it looks like there's some.
Just a few typos, just some clarity things too.
Sure.
I can't figure out what it says, so.
Yeah, we'd be happy to meet with you one-on-one, or if you highlight those and send them to us, we'll gladly take a look at those and work through that.
Any other comments? No? Wow.
All
Got it
right.
easy.
Well, thank you. Hopefully we'll be in touch with everyone. I think we'll reach out independently for a couple of you. And then if you need anything in the meantime, I think you have the PowerPoint. Our contact info is on there. We'd be happy to coordinate meetings through staff and work through those changes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank you for your hard work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the illustrations look great, by the way. Really helps.
Any new business? No new business from staff? No upcoming study sessions? I thought you'd, okay. Anything for the commissioners?
Go Millers.
Go Millers, how about that? Nice to win homecoming.
Well, we got Mustang this week, so go
Well,
Millers.
I know it's 100 degrees today, and but believe it or not, before our next meeting, we'll have Check Fest, so
Yes.
look forward to seeing you all out at Check Fest and having a great time. Hearing no other